All right, today I'm going to go over the text assignments. The goal for this is that I'm going to hammer away basically like one of these pieces a day. So we have three different text assignments that we're going to be doing within this one, or three different methods. Each class period, today, Monday, and Wednesday, I'll do a different demo on each one. You'll see how things will trickle into each other area. So feel free, if you do get done with one, you can jump into the other one and then just attempt how you would do it. And then if you see something new or something that you didn't do, then you can add that to yours, okay? So the due date for this one will be the 28th, which is next Saturday. If you get it done on Wednesday of next week, that's great. You can still turn it in. But then if you need the labs on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday to come in and finish it up, you can still do that also, okay? You would just hold on to your sheet and turn your sheet in when you come in on that Monday, okay? So the main goal of this is we're looking at different ways to animate text. You'll be animating a quote, an interface, hologram startup, and a video game Angry Birds start screen, okay? These are just broad names for what we're doing. There's nothing concrete in, this is going to be an interface startup, but it wants to look like that is the idea. We'll be using the animate button, stroke, and some other techniques to animate text coming in and going out. We'll be using expressions, so that will be a new thing. The expressions that we're using here will carry us through every project for the rest of the semester. Expressions is one of those things that really separates an amateur motion graphics person from an advanced motion graphics person. Everyone who does this professionally knows at least a handful of expressions that they could use to put into their stuff. No text at the beginning and spell check our stuff, okay? So just like our other assignments, we should have a way where the screen is blank with no text on it and then the text comes in. Now you can have something on the screen already, but we don't want the text on there yet, okay? So like if I'm doing my quote, I'm going to have a blank backdrop or a backdrop with some color on it, and then my text will just write onto it. I don't need to animate the backdrop, then have the text come in. Make sure you choose your backgrounds and colors wisely. They should look pleasant. They shouldn't look rookie-ish. Items should have a finished look to them, vignettes, color adjustments, shadows, that kind of thing. You'll turn in your research, so any images that you've gone online and you found that are like, I like the way the styles that these are, you'll turn that in. Any of your artwork, so your Illustrator stuff that you sketched out, you'll turn that in too. Okay? If you have any sketches, I would also recommend turning those in as well. The idea with all of these things that we do for research and artwork is 90% of the time, if you're working for a company, they're never just going to give you free reign to just turn it in when the assignment is due. Typically, you have to go through a whole process of getting approvals before you even jump into the software. So if I'm going to do, let's say, an interface loading screen for Geico, I would have to go through and create, this is what the artwork's going to look like. And then I would present that to the clients. I would present to my boss first, and then he would give me feedback. And then my boss would then approve it with the clients. Once they're good, then I jump in and I actually start building the thing, okay? So the easier you have the transition of being able to communicate, these are my thoughts, this is what I want to get on paper, and this is what I want the screens to look like, the easier time when you get in industry of how the whole process will work, okay? Now, you may have a client at some point that just says, I don't care, just give it to me when you're done. Good luck with those, because typically they're going to have a whole bunch of changes and revisions and whatever else because they realize, I don't like the way your interface looks. So we'll be turning in our project folder, only the latest After Effects file and any assets, also with your movie and your title bumper, okay? So the idea with this one is that the end product should look like this. Our title bumper comes in with all the updated information. We have a transition, our first text piece, a transition, our second text piece, a transition, our third text piece. Yes, sir.
Are these the same transitions we made in the previous assignment?
They can be, or you can make new ones. So I will show you how to import the other ones and put everything together. But feel free to just create new ones if you want. If you see like this is a blue color and I'm then going to a red color, well, maybe I just want to make my own transition there that would go from blue to red versus importing and doing whatever. This is our resolution, same stuff we've done before. The time length will be different for everyone. okay? So in this case, we're not locked to a specific one. Just know that we're telling a story with each one of these. If I do my quote and it goes too fast, I've lost the story. If it goes too slow, I've bored the person and I've also lost the story, okay? For every one of these, you have to gain an understanding of pacing, right? So you have to look at that and see what works. If you're not sure, ask your neighbor, ask your friends, see if they can read it as the text is coming out, see if it makes sense, see if it feels like what it's supposed to feel like. And then this is 8 points possible. Questions on the sheet? The 28th, which is next Saturday. So if it's due, if it's done before then, you can turn it in. But then if you need the labs, you can come in to the labs Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and turn it in.
So these are all going to be it's going to be one video?
One video, yep.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'm going to start with my quote. This one is going to cover probably a majority of the techniques that are going to go across the board to all of them. I'm not going to get into expressions in this one, but I will in the next one, okay? So this is the way that I currently have this set up, is I have a background, I have my text, and then I have my scripty, like who wrote it, okay? I'm going to go into my folders here just so you could see every step of the way. Again, I'm staying organized. You have to. Text animation, I have an artwork folder, and I have my After Effects files just sitting right there, okay? I'm going to go into After Effects. I'm going to make a new composition, 1280, 720, 24, and I don't know the time length, so I'm just going to go with 30 seconds to start, okay? You can go with 7 hours, but it's probably not going to be 7 hours long. You could. I don't know. Figure out the hours. I'm sure you could go that far. Your hard drive might crash, though.
3-day live stream.
Yeah. Let's rename this. This is going to be quote. Put quotes. Let's rename that. Come on. I'm going to make a folder in here for my compositions, and then I'm going to drop that in there. Okay. So now I want to bring my artwork into After Effects as a way to just use it as a template. That's all I'm going to use it for. So I'm just going to click here, just like we did with our audio, and find my quote. There's my quote. For now, I'm just leaving this as footage. Later on, I'll show where we would change this to create different ways that we would import something. Okay. Then I'm just going to drop this down into my quote here. Now, this should fit perfectly. If my composition is 1280 by 720, my Illustrator file was 1280 by 720, bless you, these things should line up perfectly. If they don't, you've done something wrong. Figure out which end of this is not working out correctly, okay? So now, this is just placeholder. I'm going to jump back to Illustrator, and I'm going to highlight my text, and I'm just going to copy it and paste it. So literally, Control-C, jump back to After Effects, hit the text tool, and then paste it in there. And you'll see how it just drops in the same exact way that I laid it out. After Effects is great for being able to do basic text, but anything outside of adjusting things you really can't do very easily. In Illustrator, Illustrator and After Effects, this is not a big deal. Grabbing this, changing the font, that's no big deal. But let's say that I didn't like the spacing here. Illustrator has this touch type tool where I can click on this and I can just move this left or right, and those changes will transfer into After Effects very easily, where in After Effects I literally have to highlight the letter and adjust the kerning, then highlight the next letter and adjust the kerning. It's horrible. I'm going to undo. There we go. All right, so just be aware of that. Now I'm just going to move this into position. If it helps, I can give this a different color just for the time being so I can see where the lines are. All right, that's close enough. And then I'll make that white. Okay. Now I'm going to copy the Dolly Parton text. So same process, Control-C. Click down here, paste it. I'll change my color. And then just line that up. Yeah, that's close Close enough. Put that back to white. Okay. And now I'm just going to make a solid for my background, and I'm going to choose this color. I've already got my colors set up. I did that in Illustrator, so I'm not going to like reinvent it. Just there it is. And so now I've just rebuilt that Illustrator comp inside of After Effects. Okay, copying, pasting, making a solid, done. I can hide this other layer. Okay, now I'm going to hide the text for a minute just so you can see how this process works. Okay, I'm going to make a brand new piece of text, and this is just going to be underscores. Okay, I'm going to shrink these down and copy and paste this a couple times. Okay, so now the concept with this is I want to be able to edit each one of these letters, characters separately. That's the goal. That's the idea with how we're going to do this. As I grab the layer and move this, I'm moving the entire layer's position. That's not what I want to do. So in order to animate the individual pieces, I have to dig deep into the text field here. And then if I go under text, you can see some of the options. One of them is source text. So if at some point you decided you want to change your text and you want to animate it, you can do that. It won't transition, it'll just pop. So if I typed in hello and I wanted that to transition to goodbye, where the hello keyframe is, it'll say hello, and it'll keep saying hello until it gets to the goodbye keyframe, and then it'll just pop into goodbye. Okay, so typically it's not something we would do. You'll see there's also path options if you wanted your text to be like on a path. And then there's some other options here for where your characters are laid out. Now, where we're able to animate is right here where it says animate. Now, this is when I drew a shape and I went to that trim path tool. This is where I was able to create that trim path. But this is text. This doesn't have trim path. It has all of this stuff. So let's say that I wanted to alter the position of this line. So I'm going to go to position. And what we're going to see is if I zoom in, you'll see a bunch of little dots. I think you can see that. There you can definitely see it. Okay. I'll leave that off for now so we can see that a little bit better. Now what that's doing is giving basically a placeholder for every single one of those dots, or for every single one of these characters. Now it did create this animator here, and I do have two things. One is a range selector, and one is a position. So this is going to be the confusing part because now we're adding another position to our list of things. This position is kind of like a starting point. Where do you want this to start from, okay? And in some cases you could use it like where do you want to end, but in this case we're going to use it where do you want to start. So I'm going to say that I want my characters to start like way up here. So I'm just going to grab the Y and just drag this until it's way up there. Okay, so the whole thing is moved up. Now, the range selector, if you remember from the trim path, this should look very similar. Start, end, and offset. Those are the three things we have there. This works exactly the same as the other start, end, and offset. This is the start, this is the end. Right now, the entire thing is being animated. The entire thing is in the up position. If I grab this end point and I drag it, you'll see how the letters or characters are just moving down. So I can have them go this way. If I grab the start, I can have them go that way. Okay? Now, it's kind of weird having them on the screen, so I'm going to push them up even further. Now, with them up there, as I animate this, it's going to look like each one of the characters is kind of like falling into place from the void, wherever that is. Okay? So that looks pretty cool, like that. And then I can animate it. So I can hit start here, scooch up a bit, put start at 100, and then I would go like that.
Oh, it's cool.
Okay, so it's like building the piece. That's way too long.
First, 'cause that just seemed like a red thing.
There you go. So that's going a little bit faster. And then if you throw on motion blur, obviously that'll give a little bit more effect to it. Oop, we just lost it. We don't see anything happening. Let's scooch those apart more. All right, let's bulk up our font. I think I need to make something a little bit thicker here. Let's go with stencil. There we go. It's a nice thick font. No, it's still chunky. I don't know what that is.
No, it's like a really old video game system.
No.
Flatliner.
I am flatlining. Let's really stretch this out. There we go. Now we can actually see the pieces coming down. There we go.
Oh, it's probably, yeah, it's going so fast you couldn't see it.
Right. They were just jumping, and that motion blur was so quick. I could have upped the samples and stuff, but I didn't want to do that. Right. So now we can see that we're getting motion blur. It's coming in. 16 seconds is way too long for that to be even happening. Right. So let's turn motion blur off for now. Right. But that's the idea with it. Now, inside of this animator, I'm going to scooch this up so we can see this a little bit better. Inside the animator is this range selector. This is start, end, and the offset. I'm going to delete my keyframes, and I'm going to set my range to something like, let's say, 40 here and 60 there. Okay? So now you'll see that nothing is there, right? So what's happening is it's either up here, or it's down there, or it's going very quickly in that transitional period. Okay? If I animate this offset, I can animate where it's actually happening at. Okay? If I go, set that back to 0, to the advanced area, I get a lot more options. Okay? And this is where you can really start to play with what this is looking like. So right now we're doing it as a percentage. You could do it as an index. Basically, like each one of the characters is a number, and then it would do it based on that. So that's another way to do it. You can do it characters. You can do it characters excluding spaces. You can do it words. You can do it lines. So if I had, I'm going to do this as words, and basically the whole thing is just going to move together. Okay? Because it's using that as one word. But if I broke this up into some underscores, spaces, underscores, spaces, and then I copied and pasted this a couple times. There we go. And then I use this. We would see how it's taking each one of those words, basically, and moving each one of those words into position. Okay? Now, I'm going to leave that at characters. I'm going to go down here where it says shape. And this is typically where you want to start playing. So right now it's set to square. So basically it's going to be like either on, off, or like this harsh transition in between. If I set this to ramp up, you'll see how it goes up like that. If I set it to ramp down, it'll go the other way. If I set it to triangle, it'll do that. If I set it to round, it'll do that. And if I set it to smooth, it will do that. Okay? So now as I do this offset, you see how I get a nice smoother transition than I had before. Okay? So now if I'm animating this, let's set this to 0, let's set this to 100, let's set that to 0. Now as I animate this, you can see how I'm able to like animate this thing like wiggling onto screen or wiggling off screen. Okay, or I can move it here and then just use the offset to get that to slide to the correct spot. Okay. Now, this is just position, right? And these lines are kind of hard to read. So let's go and hide that one for now. Let's bring back my wording. And let's do this to the wording. So I'm going to go to animate. I'm going to go to position. And I'm going to move my position down here. Okay, that's my starting point is below my screen. And I'm making sure I go actually below the screen. Now as I go to my range selector, I go to the start. Now I can get these to come up like this. Okay. Now one thing that is going to make this look a lot nicer is maybe adding in some other effects besides just position. So this is just position moving in. Okay, it looks very staticky, just like jumping into position. I want it to feel a little bit more softer, dynamic-y. Right, something like that. I'm going to go to my property here, and I can add in scale, let's say. Okay, so if I add in scale, again, this is the starting position of the scale. I'm going to set that to 0. So now I don't need another range selector. Both the position and scale are linked together. So now when this comes up, it's going to scale up and then get in position. Okay, now let me stretch the keyframes out so we can see it a lot better. So now you can see how the letters are each scaling up and jumping into position. And then you can also see why maybe you would not want to use the spaces as characters, because if we're going this slow, you can really see where it pauses after each word to do like the space. So if I go into my advanced, I go into characters excluding spaces, and then I rewind this, it'll feel a little bit more like flowy from one piece to the next. Yes, sir?
Do we have to use this effect?
Not this specific one. I want you to use an animator using this kind of thing. Okay? So one of these things in here, you'll use some way to get it on the screen.
Okay.
Okay? Oops. All right. So, and again, I'm going really slow because of how it's being laid out. Now, this is one area where we wouldn't easy ease. If I easy eased or use a speed graph, basically like the first half of the word would go really slow and then the rest of it would just slam onto the screen. This is not something we'd want to happen. Right. In this case, we wouldn't want to. We want a steady flow of the text. Mm-hmm.
What if we have two different ways of font in one line of text? Would it make sense in that application?
It could. The other way that we would do something like that, so like let's say in here, I wanted loud to be a little bit more emphatical, like something else happened. I would actually break that apart and have its own layer. So I would say B, and I would pause my text here, and I would drop in the word loud or something, or have that come in some other way. Yep, and the same thing with important. The ones that we watched where the text was kind of flowing from one to the other, if you saw the layers in that, crazy amounts, right? Cool. So we can do any of these. So if I went to, let's say, this, and I added opacity, again, this is the starting point. I'm going to put it at 0. So now they're going to scale up and get less opaque or more opaque, and then fall into place, okay? If you think of the matrix, all those letters and numbers coming down, you know, that kind of thing. If I went the other way, we would get something that looks similar to that without the scaling, okay? Now this is way too slow. When you put text in, you want it to be able to read as fast as you're able to read it, okay? So as I squish this in, I'm going to go too much. I'm going to go to 2 seconds. Okay, that's way too fast because I feel like I'm like panicking to read this thing. So let's go to 8 seconds. A little bit too slow. Let's go maybe to 6.5. Let's go to 6. Right, so you'll find that sweet spot of where the text feels like as it's coming out, I'm reading it without having to feel rushed or feel like I'm waiting, right? That's the idea with it, okay? Now, everyone reads at different speeds, so you just kind of estimate, you know, how it is. If you're not sure, again, ask someone else to read it for you. Cool. So now I want this to, again, be a little bit more dynamic. So all of these ones I added here, position, scale, and opacity, all of these are synced up right now with that same range selector. So what I can do is I can actually add a second range selector or a second animator that will give it a little bit more pop to it, okay? So I'm not going to use this add. I'm going to go back up to animate, and I'm going to go back up to scale here. I'm also going to get rid of, I think, this position. I don't think I want that position. This, yeah, where'd my animator go? There's one animator. I must not have clicked it. That's fine. So this is just scale and opacity right now. So that's what scale and opacity are doing. I actually like that more. The coming up is a little bit too distracting. So I'm going to go to click on the text, click on animate, and then click on scale. There we go. So now I have a second range selector. And now this one, I'm actually going to make this bigger, okay? So I'm going to make this, let's say, 120. Now all the text gets bigger. So what I want to do is I want to sync this up. As the text is scaling from the first one, right behind it, I want this other one to make them bigger and then get them back to where they were, okay? So that's where I'm going to go into my range selector. I'm going to fit this range to like, I don't know, 55 and, oops, 45 and 55, okay? So now somewhere in the middle here, right here where this line is and right here where that line is, these are where it's getting bigger, okay? And as I drag this offset, you'll see how they're popping. I'm going to go a little bit bigger on the scale just to emphasize it. Okay, that's way too much, but just so we can see it, and then we can tone it down. So now if I animate this offset, you can see how this is then, doing that. Now this feels a little bit too abrupt also, so I'm going to go into my advanced. I'm going to go to the square and make this round. Yeah, round is good. There we go. Now it was a subtle change, but it's just how it's changing that scale instead of it just being like, these are not, these are. Now it's like more of a gradual change to the center of them, okay? So now I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to reset my offset to -100. I'm going to keyframe it. I'm going to go to the end of this other one up here, now that I have the timing right on that, and set this one to +100. Now this is not going to be set up right. I'm going to need to adjust it. Typically what's going to happen is my first animator is going to go through and do the scale and opacity, and then like, I don't know, a second later, the other one's going to come through and start making things bigger, okay? And then we'll adjust from there. So I'm going to hit play. Oop, there it goes. And then the other one actually passed it up, right? So I need to find out where that range is. So if I come in here, oh, that's where it's starting to get bigger, right there. Okay? So I'm going to go here and I'm going to look at this number. This number is basically going to be about -50, okay? So I'm going to jump back to the beginning and set this to -50. Actually, I guess it was -56. There we go. And then hit play. And now you'll see how it's popping as it's coming out on the screen. Now, this other one on the end, it's doing the same thing. It's going way too far. So I'm going to set this to, I'll put the same number, just positive, so 56. Okay, I think it's probably still going too much. It's definitely passing it up. Yep, it's gone. Okay, so I'm going to need to reset that to maybe 50. Maybe it is 56. I just need to stretch it out just a smidge. There we go. All right, that feels like it might work. All right, maybe a little bit more. I think it's kind of losing it at the end. Okay, and again, I'm kind of looking to make sure that it feels like it's flowing. As one of these is scaling up, the other one's right behind it, making it bigger and then popping it down. I think that feels pretty good. Cool. I like that. Now I can go back to that scale and make this not so ridiculous. Like 130 is probably a good number, I think. There we go. I think I actually want to make this instead of round and make it smooth. Let's see if that gives us anything different here. Yeah, it feels like a little softer transition. It felt like it was like hitting hard when it landed. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just reading through. Does it still feel like the text is readable at this stage? It still feels like that to me. Be loud about the things that are important to you. I can probably speed it up just a smidge.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit U.
It's probably all that like softness and everything that made it seem slower.
Yeah. And I'm going to pull these in a little bit. I'm going to make sure I pull both of them in. And then again, look at my timing, make sure everything still feels like it's working. All right, that feels good. I could probably adjust this a little bit further. That's good. Cool. Okay. Now that could work for opacity, that could work for scale, it could work for anything. Let me shrink this, make it bigger. Let's go to this range selector here. And I'm just going to add another property to this. And then this one I'm going to change, just so we can see it, I'm going to change this to 20. So now we have this kind of like flickering that's going through it, because at the same time that it's like scaling up, it's also like dimming a bit. So again, that's kind of like a cool effect that could work in how you're doing your stuff. The hardest thing about this is understanding that we have basically this line. One of these lines is being animated by this thing to say it's off and now it's gradually on. The other one is coming by and saying it's off, it's on, and it's off. And that's kind of sliding through here. Okay, so there's, again, lots of different ways that you could do that. If you don't like it, you can just delete that. I could also add a position to this. Let's say I wanted not only to scale, but also to move it in position a little bit. So I'm going to go here so I can see it. And then I will scoochy it up a bit like that. Right? So again, more of a fun thing. We kind of lose the effect of this quote. It's more of a serious quote.
Yeah.
By doing this like caterpillar thing.
Seems like something cheesy from kids, but
It does, right? All right, but that's pretty good. Like that works. Okay, so that works for mine. Now, just so you can see what some of the other properties do, I'm going to just duplicate my quote, hide the other one, and then I'm just going to delete the animators and then look at some of the other properties for it. You'll see these when we get into other assignments too of where you may want to use them. So some things like character offset. If we go here, we still have a range selector, right? And we just have this character offset. So I'm going to put this at 5. And you'll see all of them went crazy.
I just used that.
Good. And now you can basically like, decrypt something,
I just figured that out like a couple days ago.
right? And the same way that I'm scaling things up, I could use that character offset so that it comes up and like switches characters and then comes back to that original character. If you use character value, it'll actually jump to a specific value. So I'll delete that one. I'll add character value. So you'll see they're all like the same value.
That's sweet. That could be like a glitch for text.
Right. Now what's also neat, this is where I would use this, is on this range selector, we're getting a very linear thing. Like these points are being modified and these points are not being modified. And then there is a transition between them. Under the add, under selector, these are different things that you can do to add different ranges or different ways to select what's getting modified. So there's the default range selector. Then there's a Wiggly. Now Wiggly is just random. Okay, that's what it means. So now as I rewind this and hit play, now we're getting this. Okay. Now I can control inside the Wiggly selector. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, but we only need to refocus on a couple things. Wiggles per second. So if I set that to 0.5, be less wiggles per second.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Cause it's like really close. Is there a way to like make it evenly spaced or no?
I don't think you want it evenly spaced. I think it looks better like that.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
I don't know. Yeah, it might be the font that I've chosen. Preserve case and digits. Character alignment, centered. Yeah, there we go. So if I went left or top, you see it's there. If I went to centered, that feels a little bit more.
Yeah.
And maybe adjust kerning. Yeah, I'll do the whole thing. There we go. Right, and then on top of this, I believe we can use the range selector to then animate what's actually being affected.
Oh.
Okay, so we can go here, scooch you up a bit, go there. Right, so now it looks like it's like decrypting it, right? So when we get into our hologram, this might be something you actually want to include in yours as that kind of thing. Our text animator assignment we will use in our hologram a whole lot. You'll have different pieces of the interface all over that you want to add specific kind of text. Some will be scrolling, some will be this kind of stuff, whatever. Okay. What else do we have in here? There's tracking, line weight, opacity, rotation. We'll get into more of that. That's kind of a silly one for now. Let's just add it for fun. So our starting point will be negative 180.
Whoa.
That looks very gross.
So now they're like falling into place. I'll get rid of that character offset or character value, and I'll get rid of the wiggle. Wiggle. And now you'll see what it does. So everything is upside down, and then it's just going to rotate into position. Right? So this works very handy when you have something else like opacity or scale. So that way, as it's rotating, it's scaling up also, or it's opacitying up. Right, and then add scale to that too, probably. Okay, so those are the text animators, and you'll see they're all over the place. If you look at any animations on TV, typically you're going to see some sort of text animator that's there. If you find one that works for you and you're like, I want to use this a whole bunch, you can actually grab, where are you at? There you are. Grab my text animators, and under animation I can save that as a preset, and then I can reuse that later on. So if I'm doing a title sequence for a movie and I want to make sure that everyone's name gets the same effect applied to it, all I would have to do at this point is just grab their name, drop this effector on it, and boom, that effect will happen. Okay? Cool. So that's how I got the one part. Okay, so that's how I'm able to get that on there. Now I need to get my scripty text on here, okay? Now we're doing this the blunt force easy way to do it. There's a longer process to make it look even fancier. I'll mention it. If you want to go through it, you can. But ideally what I want to do is I want to look like this is actually being written out, okay? So this is the gist of it. I'm going to go to my pen tool here, and I'm going to outline, whoa, that's way too big. I'm going to outline the direction that I want this to write in. That, and then I'm going to come here. And it doesn't matter if I go like I'm doing, like around the letters, as long as I'm covering them up, which I have some white spots I have to adjust. Further. There we go. And then I'm going to click off, and I will click this one. Yep, looks like it starts here. Or maybe not, maybe it started there. Yeah. I do, and that's where the more difficult part would be, is because we'd actually have to break this up into different pieces inside of Illustrator and then do each one of these letters individually. Because of how fast this is going to go, it's not going to be a huge deal if we do see part of those letters ahead of time. If it was a little bigger on the screen, definitely, but it's kind of small, it's off to the side, we'll have motion blur, so you really shouldn't notice it too much. You can. So like in here, that's what I did here, is I took my text and I made paths out of it, and then I just copied these paths, made a shape, and then pasted it to that right there.
Oh, so you can just
Yeah, you can do this that way too.
That's way easier.
It is way easier, but it's not as accurate. I'll show it why when we do the next step. Let's deselect that. Okay, so I have this shape layer here. And what I need to do is I need to write that out, okay? So this is a pen tool, so I should be able to go into this, go into my add, and use that trim path. So now in the trim path, I have my start and end point, okay? Right, we're masking it. So we're going to do just a mask just to reveal it. So I'm going to go up a little bit, write that out. we go. And then, like I said, it's a little bit too thin, so maybe I can adjust some of the points. Just move their position some. That works. And maybe I'll add another pixel to this. There we go. Okay. All right, so there we go. So now I'm going to connect it to the Dolly Parton text so that they work together. So I'm going to open up my switches. And from the track mat, I'm going to say that the layer above it, which is that mask I just drew, is the alpha. So that means that wherever it drew that shape, now my text will appear. So when I rewind this and hit play, you can see how it looks like it's writing the wording. Okay, now, it does look weird, right? Because you can see the lines going through. But if I do this and I turn on motion blur, right. Oops. Let's rewind that again. Click off.
Oh, wow.
Right? So it's a little bit easier to see when it's further away. But again, it all depends on your...
And if you want, you could probably, like, change, like, I can't think of it. It's like the end of it, like, make it like a circular thing.
You could, right?
Yeah.
But each one of these spots, even where we're overlapping, each one of those should be broken up as a separate piece. So when we look at the shape inside of Illustrator, I just duplicate this down here. I should have to cut this here and have like this arm here, here, and basically all the way to this thing. That should all be one piece. And then the loop going around this would be another piece. And then the O, that's pretty standard. That should be fine. I do like the L is one piece. This L is a separate piece. This one part of the Y is a piece, and then that part of the Y is a separate piece. And then we get to the P, and same thing, cutting it apart into separate shapes in order to be able to do each piece individually, okay? All right, so this way I have a bit more speed in this, right? Draw it on there, it's done. Now, let's go to the other one. So I'm going to go to this one. Remember I said this is the one that I copied from Illustrator. Now this one is paths that I've copied from another program, so they're not actually like the shapes. So if I were to, let me line it up first. If I were to open this up, there's no animate here to get this. So After Effects has a couple tools that allow us to do that. One of them is under Generate, Write On, okay? So this is a write on effect, and what it'll do is it will, wherever your path is, it will draw that path out. So I'm going to turn this off for a second just so I can see. This is my path, so it's just hiding whether I can see it or not. I don't want to see it. Oops, sorry, I went to the wrong one. That's the wrong one. That's a different one we could also use. I want to go Generate Stroke. That's the one. Now on this, there is a start here and end there. Okay. Now you'll notice it's only doing the first part of the D. I have to go in here and say do it to all masks, and then it'll do it to all the masks. And then I have to make the stroke bigger so it covers the whole thing.
Can't make it just do the inside?
I would have to draw that out because the path goes around the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So I would go back to the beginning. I would say here's the end. Scoochie up. There's that. And then I would do the same thing, just put this on top of that layer. Make sure this is set to a mask. And now when I hit play, wait, why are you showing?
It's probably the other one.
No, it's that one. On original image, no. On transparent, that's what I want to do. There we go. So again, this doesn't look perfect, but if I speed it up enough, and we're zoomed out to like that, you don't notice it too much, right? I could adjust the points still and tweak things around, but
I like the other one better, honestly.
right.
Yeah, it looks more natural.
Now, we do have an issue with the other one, so let's delete that one because that's the bad one. This other one, we have Dolly as one shape, and then I put Pardon on another shape. Now, I could have drawn these all in the same one. I could have just continued this path and gone over here and started to draw that. That wouldn't have been an issue. But if I needed to like cross this line, that might look weird, okay? I don't think I did. I think I went that way. I don't But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one here. I'm going to copy the trim path from this, go to this one, move my mouse to the end of these points, and paste it. Wherever you copy and paste an effect, it'll also offset the keyframes there. So notice how these keyframes are here. They're not at the beginning, even though I copied and pasted that effect. So now we should get that one drawn, and then that one drawn. Then I'm going to make sure motion blur is on both, grab both of these, and I'm going to Control-Shift-C to pre-compose it. Dolly writing text. Move all the attributes, okie dokie. Hide this layer. Make sure it's still an alpha matte, and then we should get the whole thing. Right? Pretty easy to do once you have that path outlining it. Okay? And now it's just a matter of offsetting. So I don't want either of these to really be present until my text is done. Right there. So I'm just going to hit my arrow tool, slide that down. And there it is. Okay? So here's the end of my text. I'm going to move everything. So not my background. I move the text here and then my other ones. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of room at the beginning, like a second. When we do our transitions, I need to have some sort of blank space at the beginning for my transition to overlap so I can have a nice, easy transition. A second should be good. I'm going to do the same thing at the end. Here's where the end of this is right there, 9:06. So I'm going to go to, let's say, 10:06, hit N, and then trim my comp. Okay? Now, this is not done. This is just technically done. Okay? The artistic side is still not there. This background looks pretty boring. So now we're going to make it look fancier. So I duplicated my layer. I'm going to add a gradient. If I can find it, there it is. Radial ramp. I'm going to move my dots, swap my colors, and then set this to a multiply. Okay, that looks fancier. Then I can hit T for opacity and adjust that if I want to soften it some. I'm going to go to my text up here, and I'm going to add a drop shadow. I'm going to add this a different way. Okay, so the way I showed before is going to layers, going to layer styles, and then adding drop shadow here. I'm going to do it manually. So I'm going to duplicate my layer. This is my top one. This is my bottom one. The bottom one is going to be black. I'm going to use my arrow tools and nudge it. And then I'm going to use a blur effect underneath. Oops, that's way too much. 15. Oh, we're getting closer. 10. All right, that's good. All right, and I'm going to hit T and then just adjust the opacity of this to like 50. Okay? Now, there's no real big advantage to doing it one way or the other. This way just gives you a different option because I could give this a completely different color. I have it really easily right there. But the downside is if I change one, then I have to change the other one too. But this one I can do a lot more things with. You know, I could actually like reverse it and flip it, and then I would have a reflection. So if I went to scale and I went to this off and I made this -100 and I squishy this down, right? Now we have something that looks more like a reflection down there.
Can you skew it to make it even look like it the latest?
Yep, I could do that too. Right? So again, you get more options by doing it separately as opposed to doing it all in the same part. Other stuff I could do to this too is I could add some of those accents. So as it's like writing out there, I could have some lines kind of going around the piece if I wanted to, or have the little blips come out. I'm not going to do those here because I've already shown those before. But that's pretty good. That's typically all we would need for something like this. I would also take the same effect, and I would add that to my dolly part at the bottom. I'm actually going to take both of these, though, and Control-Shift-C and say Dolly Parton writing. That way they're all pre-composed, and now I can duplicate this and not have to worry about them being a separate piece. Now, because this is a duplicate of it, I can't just go over here and change this to white or black or whatever. I actually have to go under Effect, Color Correction, and go to Hue and Saturation, and then just take the lightness down to black. And then I can go to my effect, and then I can go to blur, and then I can go to Gaussian blur. Okay, your ability to work quickly on these things obviously is paramount because you'll get jobs that are just like these kinds of things, like we need 100 of these, or you need to add a bunch of these inside of one animation. So the faster you can get at doing these kinds of things, obviously the better it's going to be. You also want to save your stuff every once in a while. Now what's cool too is if I go into this and I change my text, let me get right on top of that. Quiet. That's the introvert. There you go. And make sure, oops. That's weird, but every time you like just copy paste text, it copies the color also. Remember to change the color, there we go. Everything will update, right? So again, if I had 15 quotes, I wanted them all to do the same kind of thing, I could just copy and paste the text if I wanted and just change it, or I could do that. It's only when you get into like the scripty ones that obviously you need to do something different because of how those are set up. Cool, so that would be number one is all done. And I go to my project, make sure all my compositions are organized. I have artwork, so I need to throw that into my artwork folder. And then I save. Okay, so you can see when I get to my other assignments, when I get to my hologram opener, this thing being written out, it's going to be a very similar way to being written out like it would. The only difference with this one, we're going to have some kind of cursor kind of flashing in there. So that part you could write on there, but then the cursor part will go over. And then when I do my Angry Bird opener, the Angry Bird comes in like that, but then the rest of this just comes in like a regular game, but it has expressions and stuff. Okay? Don't save that. Cool. So any questions on those yet? No? All right.